Number 5. Robot and Frank. Set in the not-too-distant future, Hunter, played by James Marsden, acquires a robot caretaker for his father, Frank, played by Frank Langella, a retired cat burglar suffering from dementia who spends his time harassing local shopkeepers and hitting on the local librarian, played by Susan Sarandon. Frank hates his new robot at first, but soon warms up to it when he realizes it could be a useful aid for his old profession. I think this flew under most people's radar, which isn't all that surprising. It reportedly had a budget of about $2.5 million and had a very limited theatrical release. I probably wouldn't have known about it either if Mr. Nash Bozard hadn't mentioned it during an episode of Radio Dead Air Live. Thanks to him, I checked it out, and I'm glad I did. Frank Langella absolutely owns this movie and makes for a very sympathetic character, even though by all rights he shouldn't be sympathetic as he's a criminal. And the relationship between man and robot was surprisingly charming. I also thought they did a pretty good job of illustrating both the pros and cons of the changing world and the constantly evolving technology. And while the film maintains a mostly serious tone, it also has some incredibly funny moments, including one that features a countdown, and that's all I will say. If you haven't seen it, and chances are you haven't, you really should.
It's time for your enema.
Number 4. The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey. Do I really need to summarize the plot? It's the fucking Hobbit, you should know it by now. I anticipated this would end up higher on the list, and if it was more like the Lord of the Rings trilogy, it probably would have been. But it had a few issues that bumped it down a bit, namely the inconsistency in tone and its tendency to drag at points. And I think they would have been better off if they had stuck to their original plan and made it 2 movies instead of 3. But that doesn't make it a bad film by any means. In fact, I thought it was excellent. It still had its memorable moments, and since we have Peter Jackson at the helm, it looks every bit as beautiful as Lord of the Rings. The major players are Martin Freeman, Richard Armitage, and Sir Ian McKellen. Freeman takes over the role of Bilbo Baggins from Ian Holm, and I, for one, thought he absolutely nailed it. I was a bit skeptical of their choice to cast Armitage as Thorin, since the only other role I've seen him in is the sheriff in the BBC series Robin Hood, and I thought he was a bit too pretty for the role, for lack of a better word. But the makeup department certainly fixed that, and I thought he made a decent Thorin. And Sir Ian... what can I say? The dude is Gandalf. He hasn't played the role in a decade, and it's like he never left. I don't think he could give a bad performance if he wanted to. Of course, we also have Andy Serkis in his final appearance as Gollum, and Sylvester McCoy as the delightfully mad Radagast the Brown, who rides a sled driven by rabbits. Awesome. They did make a few changes to the story and borrowed heavily from other Tolkien writings like the Silmarillion, but none of the additions really felt out of place. If you're not a fan of Tolkien or fantasy in general, there's not much here for you, but if you are, well, then you saw this opening weekend, so why am I talking to you? Moving on. Number 3. Argo. Set in 1979 during the takeover of the American embassy in Iran, 6 diplomats managed to escape the Iranians and go into hiding in the home of the Canadian ambassador. CIA agent Tony Mendez, played by Ben Affleck, is tasked with getting them out and comes up with an incredible plan to do so. He's going to pose as a Canadian movie producer and attempt to trick the Iranian government into thinking he and the diplomats are a film crew scouting locations in Iran. But in order for the ruse to work, he has to enlist the help of some friends in Hollywood, played by Alan Arkin and John Goodman, and actually go through the entire pre-production process. Getting a script, selling it to a studio, casting, advertising, everything short of making the actual movie. Which I'm kind of surprised they didn't do anyway after they went through all this trouble. I've never been a big fan of Affleck as an actor, but he is quickly becoming one of my favorite directors. This is an incredibly suspenseful movie, and it has absolutely no right to be. It's based on a true story, and we know how that story ends. We know they make it out, we know they survive. But the film still manages to plant little seeds of doubt into your head. Of course, part of this is due to artistic license. Much of the film is not historically accurate, but I can deal with that. It's not a documentary, and it's not trying to be. I also have to give props to the makeup department, who did an amazing job of making the actors look like the real diplomats. They deserve at least an Oscar nomination for that. Oh, and one more thing. Argo, fuck yourself. Number 2. Skyfall. James Bond, once again played by Daniel Craig, is presumed dead after an operation gone wrong, and he uses death as an excuse for early retirement. But when a list of all undercover NATO operatives is acquired by a group of terrorists led by a man called Silva, played by Javier Bardem, Bond comes out of retirement/death and returns to MI6 to track Silva down before his colleagues are exposed and killed. But coming back from the dead isn't easy, even for 007, and he'll have to struggle to get back to top form. Thank God they learned their lessons from Quantum of Solace. Director Sam Mendes does a great job balancing the action and the drama, which was a welcome step up from Quantum's director, who apparently only knew how to do chase scenes. Craig once again plays a more human Bond, which I personally prefer to the English Superman we've seen in some Bond films, as it makes the character much more interesting. He's quickly becoming one of my favorite actors to play 007. I'm glad they finally realized they have one of the greatest actresses alive in Dame Judi Dench, and actually gave her something to do this time. The end result is a story that is every bit as much M's as it is Bond's, and Dame Judi really shines in the role. Sadly, this will be her last appearance as M, but boy did she go out with a bang. And what can I say about Javier Bardem that hasn't already been said? He stole this fucking movie. His on-camera introduction, which was about a 2-minute speech in a single cut, was damn near perfect. One of the best Bond villains ever. They also threw in a few nods to the classic Bond films, which brought a smile to my face. All in all, I thought this was one of the best Bond movies of all time. I don't know if I put it at number 1, but it's definitely in my top 5. And finally, number 1. Battleship. I know, you probably think I'm crazy, and I understand why. Truth be told, I didn't think I would like this one either. After all, how do you make a 2-hour movie out of such a simple board game? But you know, I decided to keep an open mind, and I gave it a chance. And once I sat down and watched it, I actually thought it was the best movie of the year. For me to vote on! I'm joking, of course. This was not the best film of the year. It was complete and total shit. Fuck this movie, fuck the people who made it, and fuck the horses they rode in on. Number 1. For real. The Avengers. Well, what else was I gonna put at number 1? I've said before that I love a good superhero movie, so what better choice for my number 1 than the greatest superhero movie of all time? That's right, I said greatest of all time. Forget Superman 2, forget The Dark Knight, forget Spider-Man 3. Seriously, forget it. Just forget it ever existed. It's better that way. This is the new gold standard. Marvel has been building up to this for years, and they had a lot of hype to live up to. Suffice to say, they did not disappoint. Well acted, well shot, great action sequences, great special effects, and a near-perfect blend of action and comedy, courtesy of writer-director Joss Whedon, made this easily the most fun I had at the movies all year. What more could you ask for? Of course, Robert Downey Jr. stole the show as Tony Stark, as he always does, and Tom Hiddleston was delightfully evil, reprising his role as Loki. But I also want to give credit to Mark Ruffalo, who took over the role of Bruce Banner. No offense to Edward Norton, but I didn't miss him at all. Ruffalo was brilliant as Banner, and after seeing The Avengers, I want to see a new Hulk movie with him in the role. And speaking of the Hulk, how could you not like everything that big green rage monster did in this movie? Including, and especially, this.
I am a god, you dull creature, and I will not be bullied by...
Puny god.
Solid fucking gold. Is it a perfect movie? Of course not. Will it win Best Picture? I'll be surprised if it's even nominated. But I can honestly say I did not enjoy any other movie this year more than The Avengers. Well, that's it for 2012. I wonder what 2013 will bring us.
Some people will say that not all witches are evil. That's new. That their powers could be used for good. I say burn them all.
She looks angry.
Yeah, a face like that, I'd be angry too. You shut up.
Really?